Okay, good evening. My name is Sarah Pate, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Washington Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book, and a partnership between the Washington State Library and the Seattle Public Library. The Washington Center for the Book promotes literacy and a love of books, reading, and libraries. We celebrate Washington's robust literary heritage and shine a spotlight on the contribution of reading and libraries in strengthening communities and in fostering civic engagement. One of our projects is the Washington State Book Awards, and we are thrilled to present this in a series of online events with our 2020 Washington State Book Award winners with you here tonight. Our next event will be February 3rd at 6 p.m. with Erin Bobrow-Strain, author of The Death and Life of Ada Hernandez, A Border Story. I'll put the link for that event in the chat after the introduction. We'd also like to thank our event partner for tonight and for this entire series, the Washington Library Association. I'd like to welcome Brianna Hoffman, WLA Executive Director, to say a few words.
Thank you, Sarah. As Sarah mentioned, I am Brianna Hoffman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Library Association. Since 1931, WLA has been a leader in the Washington library community with over 1,100 members from academic, public, special, and school libraries. We provide advocacy, professional development, and leadership opportunities while promoting intellectual freedom and innovation. We are honored to be partnering with our friends, the Washington Center for the Book, for this event. On behalf of WLA, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Now we'll take it back to Sarah to introduce our author.
Thanks, Brianna. As you have questions for Eric this evening, please put them in the chat so that we can help facilitate getting your questions to Eric when the Q&A begins. Eric Liu is the founder and CEO of Citizen University, which works to build a culture of powerful and responsible citizenship in the United States. He also directs the Aspen Institute's Citizenship and American Identity program. He is the author of several acclaimed books, including The Accidental Asian, Notes of a Native Speaker, The Gardens of Democracy, You're More Powerful Than You Think, A Citizen's Guide to Making Change Happen, and his most recent, Become America, Civic Sermons on Love, Responsibility, and Democracy, a New York Times new and notable book. He has been selected as an Ashoka Fellow and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is featured on the PBS documentary American Creed and is a frequent contributor to TheAtlantic.com. Liu served as a White House speechwriter for President Bill Clinton and later as the president's deputy domestic policy advisor. He was later appointed by President Obama to serve on the board of the Corporation for National and Community Service. He and his family live in Seattle. Winner of the 2020 Washington State Book Award for Creative Nonfiction, Become America offers stirring explorations of current and timeless topics about democracy, liberty, equal justice, and powerful citizenship. Eric Liu, welcome, and thank you for being with us this evening.
Sarah, thank you so much for that welcome. I want to thank you and Brianna and Linda and all the others who've been involved in making the Washington State Book Awards a reality. I'm so deeply honored that Become America was selected to be one of the recipients of the award in 2020. But more than that, I'm just deeply proud to be connected to an award that is itself the product of library institutions. One thing I didn't put in that bio that Sarah, you just shared with folks is my deep, deep relationship with the Seattle Public Library. I served as a trustee of the Seattle Public Library for 10 years. I would have kept going, but I was term limited and have served as well on the foundation board for the Seattle Public Library. I'm the son of a former librarian. And I, on a personal level, on a civic level, intellectually and just emotionally, I love libraries. I love the purpose of a public library, whether at the city scale or at the state scale. And I think the ways that these institutions that have partnered to bring us together today work every day, and especially every day over the last 10, 11 months during this pandemic, is something that we have to celebrate and cheer. It's something that so many people miss, being able to be together in a room. We would have tonight been in the Microsoft Auditorium at the Central Library branch in Seattle, had we been able to. And there will come a day soon when we can, and come a day soon when libraries can host reading hours and ESL classes for English language learners and provide direct services and information access to people who are unhoused in our community. and just create this shared civic space that we together can use to make sense of things. And so I just really want to salute all of you, SPL, Washington State Library, Washington Center for the Book, for bringing us together and for all that you do. I also want to thank our friends at Seattle Channel, who are recording and will be airing this conversation as well. What I thought I would do tonight actually is tell you a little bit about how this book came to be. This book here, Become America, the subtitle is Civic Sermons on Love, Responsibility, and Democracy. And maybe the two words that are most intriguing to those of you who don't know me or the work is civic sermons. What does that mean? What's that all about? I wanted to give you a little bit of context. I'm the co-founder with my wife, Janae Kane, of an organization here in Seattle that works all around the United States called Citizen University. And our work as a nonprofit is to build a culture of powerful, responsible citizenship all across the land. And when we think about that idea of powerful, responsible citizenship, when we speak of citizens in our name and otherwise, we mean the deeper ethical sense of being a member of the body, a contributor to community. We're not talking about documentation status or legal papers. We mean the ways that all of us can and do and must right now show up for each other, for our community, and for our country. And so at Citizen University, we have a whole range of programs that are meant to teach and share and activate in people two parts of an equation that we sometimes use to define citizenship. And the equation goes like this: power plus character equals citizenship. But citizenship defined in this broad, deep ethical sense requires both a fluency in power, and that means simply, do you understand how things work? Do you understand who decides? Do you understand who decides whether libraries are funded or not? Who decides whether there's going to be bus service to get you to the library? Who decides what the price of books is going to be? All these questions that circulate around us in everyday life usually lead many people to answer with a single word: they. I can't believe they decided to cut library hours. I can't believe they aren't doing more to support institutions like libraries during a pandemic. But there is no they when you boil it down, and especially in a democracy. In a democracy, in this democracy, they is we. And we, the people, have a particular responsibility to understand the particulars of how things get decided. The exercise of power in civic life is not some distant, faraway thing out there. It is something accessible to all of us and something for which we're all accountable on some level. And we live in a time right now, for all of the trials that we're going through during this pandemic, we're also going through a time of great awakening. And I'm not talking only about awakening around things like racial justice and white supremacy. And we've seen the waves of protest and direct action since at least the murder of George Floyd, but throughout this time. I'm not talking only about that. I mean a deeper civic awakening. People recognizing in this time that we've been living through, this extraordinary period of the election just passed, and has been going around in social media just the last 3 Wednesdays, the last 3 or 4 Wednesdays, from insurrection to impeachment to inauguration. We live in these extraordinary times where people are awakening to their power and to their responsibility to practice power. And so that's one half of what we try to teach at Citizen University. But we also emphasize that if all you have is a deep understanding of how to practice power, how to move people and ideas and money and social norms and state action to get the things that you would like to get in the world, and if that capacity is completely untethered to any moral core or ethical standards, then you're just a finely skilled sociopath. And that's why the other half of our equation becomes so important. Power plus character equals citizenship. And so another body of our work at Citizen University is all about cultivation of what you might think of as civic character. And civic character for us is not the same as individual virtue. It's not the same as personal virtue. We're not talking about traits like diligence, perseverance, honesty, grit. All those things are great. But what we mean is more character in the collective. How do we live in community together? How do we hold a community together? How do we live in public? How do we behave in a way that recognizes and demonstrates in a contagious way, positively contagious way, that it's not all about us. It's not all about you. The cultivation of civic character is something that also we do in a range of our programs at Citizen University, some of them involving young people, some of them intergenerational. And probably our best known program that tries to integrate the ways that power and character come together in powerful citizenship is a program called Civic Saturdays. Civic Saturdays are these gatherings that began right after the 2016 election and continued to this day, gatherings that are essentially a civic analog to a faith gathering. It's not church or synagogue or mosque, but it intentionally has the arc and the flow and the feel of a faith gathering. Back when we could gather in person, you'd walk into a room and be welcomed as you came in. You would sit down and be prompted to converse with, turn to the stranger next to you, spend a few minutes turning and talking about not a small talk question, but a prompt that really went to the heart of things. Questions like, who in this time are you responsible for? Who do you feel like you have failed recently? What hurts in your heart right now? And then after questions like that, we hear song. We actually rise and join together in song, which is a thing that we Americans don't get to do much. There are readings of poetry. And then there are readings of texts that you might think of as civic scripture, texts drawn from not just the founding era, but from throughout our shared history. And not just the texts that are super well known to every school child, but texts perhaps you've never heard of by people you've never heard of. And yet texts that instantiate and articulate something deep about the creed that we profess to live by in the United States of liberty and equality for all, and a creed that we are still perpetually trying to actually deliver upon. And then after those readings of civic scripture, there's a civic sermon that follows, in which somebody speaks to try to make ethical and moral sense of this moment, to help give us some way to stitch together all of the chaos and the churn of this centrifugal time that we're living in right now, this fragmented demos that we are part of right now, to try to weave that back together and make some moral, ethical meaning, and then connect that back to what can we do, each of us. And so after the civic sermon, we break into civic circles where people in circles of 4 or 5 talk to each other, not only about what they were inspired or moved or provoked, challenged to think about or wrestle with during the preceding part of the gathering, but really then to make commitments about how we're going to show up now, where we live, in our community, wherever we may be, to put some of those high ideals into everyday practice. That's the arc of a Civic Saturday. And though the pandemic has prevented us from doing that still in person, we have moved online like we all have, and Civic Saturdays are happening on Zoom on a regular basis. And when Civic Saturdays began, people all over the country started asking us, well, how can we be part of these? And for a while, our team actually ran all around the country leading these gatherings. And anybody who's involved in nonprofit management, I see our board member and friend Diane Douglas in the chat, you know that running around the country to do events by yourself is a terrible way to scale an idea, super not scalable. And so what we did instead was we created a civic seminary program where we train catalytic people from communities all around the United States, small rural towns, big cities, red and blue places, places in between, to come and get trained to lead their own Civic Saturdays in their own communities and for their own communities. And so if you're interested in any of this, of course, you can check out our website, citizenuniversity.us, and there's information about all these programs. But all of that was my way of providing some context for this book and for what I wanted to share a little bit this evening, and why the subtitle of Become America is Civic Sermons on Love, Responsibility, and Democracy. What this book consists of are civic sermons that I wrote and delivered at the first 18 or 19 of these Civic Saturday gatherings, some of them in Seattle, others, as I said, running all around the country, Atlanta, Georgia, Des Moines, Iowa, Chicago, all kinds of places, again, in different kinds of settings, different kinds of audiences, and the ways in which I tried in each of these sermons to speak to the moment, whatever was going on in our country or in those communities, at that time, but also, Sarah put it so beautifully at the beginning, to connect it to deep, timeless ideas and challenges that we must bear as Americans, and especially today through this time of reckoning that we're living through. So what I wanted to do for a little while or so, maybe 20 minutes, is just to read some selections from this book to give you a taste of some of what's in here, and then I'll allow another 15 or 20 minutes or so for conversation, Q&A. And if it hasn't been said already in chat or otherwise, as we go, if you have questions, please just put them into chat. I'll try to keep half an eyeball on them, but when it comes time to do that, I'll read them, and I know others on the team here will be keeping an eye as well. I had an idea here. Instead of pre-selecting, a few passages from Become America, actually to demonstrate the way in which this book is meant to be timeless, number one, and is meant actually to be read any way you want to. You can read it sequentially, go from page 1 to page whatever it is, 300, or you can actually open it up at any point and dive in wherever you may land. What is in the book is, as I say, these 18 or so sermons, but before each sermon, we also included the texts of civic scripture that had been selected to be read prior to the delivery of that sermon, and that were meant to, in a sense, inspire and provide the moral and the artistic frame for what would follow in the sermon. So I'm going to randomly open a few pages here today and just read a couple of paragraphs wherever I open the book, and hopefully I'll land on a piece of civic scripture, and hopefully I'll land on a passage in a sermon to give you a sense of what's in here. All right, first reading. Oh, this is a good one. The random method works. This is a piece of civic scripture from a dear, dear friend and a hero of mine, a woman some of you may have heard of, named Gerda Weissmann Klein. Gerda is, I think, approaching 90 now. She is one of the best known survivors of the Holocaust in the United States, well known for a book she wrote many decades ago called All But My Life, which I think later was turned into a film that won an Academy Award. And Gerda, what is remarkable about her is not only her resilience and her grace and grit through the trials of her early life, but the way that once she actually came to the United States, and the way she came to the United States was that the man who liberated her from the concentration camp that she was in, the man who literally opened the door for her to step out of the room or the cage that she was in there, was a GI named Kurt Klein, who, as fate would have it, not too long afterwards, would become her husband. And they would raise a family, and generations later, one of her granddaughters would help her start an organization called Citizenship Counts, an organization that, using naturalization ceremonies, tries to expose to many, many people who've never been to a naturalization ceremony, never particularly thought about what it means to make a commitment as one would in an oath to the values and principles of this country, to awaken in the minds and hearts of a lot of people who aren't necessarily naturalizing immigrants becoming US citizens, what it means to live like a citizen. And so the first piece of civic scripture here on page 62 of the book is by Gerda Weissmann Klein from the memoir All But My Life. And I'm just going to read it. Wasn't it traumatic to make the transition to normality? How often I have been asked that question, and I have come to the conclusion that yes, perhaps it was. But I didn't know what the word trauma implied, and I would have been ashamed to admit any dissatisfaction, believing it to be selfish and ungrateful to complain about anything here. In retrospect, I think that coming to America was like stepping out of a dark, oppressive room in which I had been locked up for a long, long time. Once I was free and exposed to light again, the most ordinary objects, the simplest things acquired an aura of extraordinary beauty, desirability, and value. I reveled in the joy of discovery, and my gratitude was boundless. That little piece was actually the third of 3 pieces of scripture that were read on February 4th, 2017 at a Civic Saturday at the Jones Playhouse at the University of Washington. I remember that day well, actually, because the Muslim ban had just come down earlier that week. And I believe that very morning, our Attorney General here in Washington, Bob Ferguson, had filed suit against the Trump administration to stay and to block the Muslim ban. I had written a sermon called "Where is America? Where is America?" And I'll just read you a couple of paragraphs from the beginning part of this sermon. Political legitimacy is the acceptance by the people of a leader's claim to authority. It is a fragile, unspoken hybrid of laws and norms. It is one of the most fascinating aspects of civic power because you can't put your finger on it. You can't lift a finger, and yet you can't lift a finger without it. You can be legally elected and have no legitimacy, like Nixon in 1974. Or you can be powerless under the law, yet have plenty of legitimacy, like Mandela in 1989. At 5:12 this morning, Donald Trump tweeted about the, quote, so-called judge, quote, who blocked his anti-refugee and anti-immigrant executive order. This is tantamount to calling the Constitution the, quote, so-called Constitution. To Trump, the Constitution is just another contract to break, another terrible deal he inherited and refuses to honor. And you know what? There is, in fact, nothing magical about the Constitution that forces us to abide by it. Just like there's nothing magical about the office of the presidency that forces us to respect him. As a minority president aided by an adversary of the United States, Trump craves legitimacy, but he forgets that what that great philosopher Tony Soprano once said, those who want respect, give respect. If Trump wants legitimacy, let him earn it. He can start by showing the people and the Constitution some more respect, because legitimacy is in the eye of the collective beholder. It is always contested, not just on election day. It is what we say it is. Now, let me tell you, this sermon on that day was, as you can hopefully feel in just my even rereading of it, was charged. And I think that was by chance, a pretty good selection to have chosen to illuminate the idea that these questions that we wrestle with, what makes a president legitimate? What makes us obey the Constitution? What does it mean to respect the rule of law and one another? Yes, what I wrote then and delivered then in that sermon was responding to that moment. But also, I think it does not take a whole lot of civic imagination to see how literally every single word I just read applies to the moment we are living in right now. And I think this is true not only of the sermons collected in Become America, but it is true of every text we may encounter in civic life. And this is something that we try to teach people in our work at Citizen University. The texts, the objects of study in our lives as citizens, in our lives as members of the community, are anything you see and come upon and find. And so a resolution by the city council, the Facebook post by one of your neighbors about what's going on and whether your neighborhood is or isn't dealing with the fact that there are unhoused people living right there. Whatever you may come across is a potential text with which to make meaning and to hold up as a mirror to ourselves who we are and who we profess to be. One other thing I'll say about this particular excerpt I just read, in my civic sermons and in my work in general, I think it's really important to point out that at Citizen University, we're a nonprofit, we're nonpartisan. But being actually, a better way to put it is we are cross-partisan. We are cross-ideological. And what that means is we believe that ideas of civic power and civic character do not belong to either side or any side. Just like we believe the idea of true patriotism. Are you working to close the gap between our creed and our deeds? That should not belong to either side, either party, or either political force in our country. And so the cross-ideological spirit of challenging people left and right to ask, what does character require us to do? There was very little that was in fact truly conservative about the way the prior administration dealt with the Constitution. Very little in the way of norms, laws, precedent, and respect was being conserved. And there is a great deal in some of today's most agitating social change movements that, looked at a different way, are quite conservative. Because what Black Lives Matter is trying to do is to conserve the idea that all people are created equal. To not give up on it, to not throw it away, to not say that's a bunch of BS, but to hold it up there and say, we believe in this, we will hold this, and we will hold you to this. And so what's conservative and what's liberal? I think those are questions that we can argue about all day long. And as people from all around the country are having and holding Civic Saturdays, they will argue about those things. And I think that's great. Just because our politics are polarized doesn't mean that we have to avoid argument. The thing that we've got to learn how to do is to have better arguments. And better arguments begin with a recognition of principle and a recognition of what's moving us at the heart level to feel the way we feel about what's going on around us in the country. So let me pick another selection here to read next. Okay, this one actually happens to be also from a sermon delivered in Seattle. Page 224 of Become America. This is from a sermon that I delivered on April 28th, 2018, over at the Northwest African American Museum here in Seattle. And that day I'd selected 3 texts of civic scripture, a passage from the book Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, who founded the Equal Justice Initiative and has been not only a absolutely fearless and pioneering defender of Black inmates on death row throughout the American South, but has also now created a much more ambitious civic, emotional, historical, artistic project that is a memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, to all the Black Americans who were lynched during the years of Jim Crow and beyond. Bryan Stevenson's text is first, and then James Weldon Johnson, the lyrics to the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing," which some of you may know, considered informally the Black national anthem, written in 1900. And then a small passage from Pauli Murray, who was a pioneering African-American scholar and activist, a passage from a book of hers called American Credo. And this particular sermon was called Time Travel. And what I wrote about was the ways in which when you step into a place like the Northwest African American Museum, and if you haven't been there, go there when you can in person, but go to their exhibitions if you can right now. In the same way that the United States, the National Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., part of the Smithsonian and the National Mall, is an absolute requirement to have gone to and seen and reckoned with if you want to understand the United States. So is this museum in our region important to understanding the history of our region. So here's a passage that I'll just begin to read. Hindsight is foresight if we know how to see. The cultural movement that yielded Octavia Butler and her novelistic universes, as well as the Black Panther comics and film characters, is called Afrofuturism. It weaves diasporan dreams with fantastic technologies to make people here and now see that the technology for transformation already exists. It is in our hearts. It is in our willingness to organize and to make power out of thin air. We could all stand to learn from Afrofuturism. We need a futurism for us all that is dedicated to the proposition that if we are all created equal, we should start acting like it. We need a futurism that uses superheroes and comic book villains to teach us how to see what is right in front of us. And you know what? If you pay attention, you'll notice that we have the raw material for such a futurism. The superheroes and their foils are all around us now. Teenagers across the country are organizing some of the greatest social protests and direct civic actions this country has seen in, well, half a century. Meanwhile, the occupant of the White House and the occupant of Kanye West's mansion are tweeting that they are spirit brothers because they indeed are. Brothers in narcissism, in a talent for attention getting, in ignorant certitude that wealth equals wisdom, in a flattened ahistorical belief that what is now is all that is. Civic Saturday exists so that together we can remember that no condition in our country was created yesterday, and no citizen of this country will live forever. Civic Saturday exists so that we can teach each other how not just to tell the truth about our history, but also to reckon with it. Civic Saturday exists to remind us that to reckon means to calculate, to count up and tally, to prepare ourselves and others to pay the price of reconciliation. So that was a passage. The reason why it was called Time Travel is that the conceit that I used, inspired by Octavia Butler, the great science fiction Afrofuturist, proto-Afrofuturist novelist, this conceit that I used for the sermon was in fact to travel across time, decade after decade, in the life of our country, to imagine what it would have been like to have been transported where I could have participated during the early deliberations at the Constitutional Convention, how I might have participated in the fight against Jim Crow after Reconstruction was betrayed in 1877 and things began to regress and revert, and all the progress that had been made in the 12 years after the Civil War was receding. What would I have done if I'd been able to get into a time machine and poof, just plop right there and be part of it and have to show up? I think that kind of stepping out of time is a thing that should be welcome to us all right now when we're living through, is it Thursday? Is it Friday? Is it January? Is it Pandemic Monday? I don't know what time it is, right? We live in a time without time right now during COVID. And that's why an appreciation of history, personal history, collective history, national history, and an appreciation for the stories that go untold in the official versions of all those stories, personal, collective, and national. Why diving deep into that kind of history can be awfully beneficial right now. So let me do one more random selection here. And I see in chat a question, by the way, about whether this will be recorded. It is being recorded and it will be available, I think, both through Seattle Public Library, and it will air later on the Seattle channel. Okay, let me open up randomly to one more page here. Wonderful. Okay, this is a page, this is from a sermon. You know what's nice about this? Only about half the sermons in this book were actually delivered in Seattle, but all three of the selections I'm making today happen to have been randomly from sermons delivered in Seattle. This is from, on page 131, from a sermon called A Thanksgiving Recipe that I delivered right before Thanksgiving of 2017, November 18th. And this particular Civic Saturday was at the Elliott Bay Book Company. And I neglected at the beginning to say something, and I will say it now, about the Elliott Bay Book Company. The very first Civic Saturday we had was 4 days after the 2016 election. Our team had been thinking of this concept as a new program, and we've been designing it and sketching it and thinking that sometime in the first quarter of 2017, we would launch this program and start doing them in Seattle. But because of the political, psychic, emotional earthquake of Election Day 2016, we realized, forget those 3-month plans. We got to do this now. And so in 4 days, we pulled together our first gathering. And our indispensable partner in that first gathering was the Elliott Bay Book Company on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And with 4 days notice, we sent out an invitation, told folks what this brand new idea was of a civic analog to a faith gathering, and come together to make meaning and find fellowship and community to go through this. And we thought, hey, it'd be great if 30, 40, 50 people showed up. And we set up about that many chairs, brought some, some fruit and some cookies and some tea and coffee. Over 220 people ended up showing up there, cramming that basement reading room at Elliott Bay, if you know it. Let's not let the fire department hear this. I'm sure we were breaking fire code that morning, but we had folks packed in there, sitting on the stairwell, going up from that basement. And that was, as Caroline Sayer just wrote in chat, an unforgettable day, that first Civic Saturday. And so we owe Elliott Bay such a debt of gratitude for helping this movement get birth. Because when I mentioned the Civic Seminary earlier, where we're training people from all around the country to lead Civic Saturdays of their own and on their own, Caroline, who just posted in chat, is one of those civic seminarians. We call them Civic Saturday Fellows, who go through our 4-day seminary training and then lead these gatherings on their own. And so this is a nationwide movement of people all across the country in dozens of states doing this. On any given weekend, you'll find a Civic Saturday somewhere, and it all started at Elliott Bay. So let me read a few paragraphs from this sermon. My friend Jim Fallows grew up in Redlands, California, a small town in the Central Valley where people knew and trusted each other, where the Rotary and Optimists clubs were strong, where his dad was an esteemed doctor, where community pride was high. Jim has worked in the Carter White House. He's lived in Japan and China. He's been for years a national correspondent for The Atlantic, and now is based in Europe. Throughout, he's remained attuned to that old Redlands feeling. In a new book he and his wife, Deb, are writing, Jim chronicles small towns across modern-day America, where people are cultivating civic and economic renewal. But in all these travels, Jim is not trying to go back to Redlands. And he's not blind to the fact that Redlands then and now, ensconced in the heart of Orange country, has only fitfully included Hispanic migrant workers in its story of us. He's just trying to rekindle a feeling of people knowing your name and your family and looking out for you in constructive ways, in new and inclusive ways. This kind of remembering requires a certain kind of forgetting. What you've got to forget, paradoxically, are the specific circumstances that you so fondly recall. You've got to recognize that environment is not as universal, but as particular. You've got to recognize that environment not as universal, but as particular. The Redlands of Jim's youth was not the Redlands of the non-white kid, or even of the white kid whose dad wasn't a doctor. You've got to name this trick of memory, then release it, and preserve only the animating core of it, which was the feeling. The feeling is universal, or at least universally desired. I went to Redlands recently. I got it. I felt it. The question is how to make a place where everyone gets that feeling, where everyone has that yearning answered, and everyone feels seen and welcome. Jim Fallows, who I mentioned in that little excerpt, he and his wife, Deb, have since published that book. It's called Our Towns, and it's a fantastic book. I commend it to all of you. They flew all around the United States in their two-engine prop plane, and towns that were not tiny, but not big, medium-sized towns, Fresno, San Bernardino, Scranton, places that are not usually in the headlines, as he put it, are not usually in the headlines for good reasons. They're in the headlines because a place like Scranton, well, now Scranton's there because Joe Biden claims Scranton as his hometown, but Scranton had been in the headlines for being a case study of the ripple effects of deindustrialization, Rust Belt life. San Bernardino was in the headlines because of the mass shootings there a few years ago. But what he found and what Deb found in their travels and depicted in this book are the ways in which, outside the narrative of national politics, where everything is a scorched earth, zero-sum trench warfare battle to the death, people in our towns are just trying to make stuff work. They're just trying to fix stuff. They're just trying to understand problems, understand each other. And they don't have the luxury of just demonizing people outright and relying only on tweets and talking points. You either are or are not going to make transportation work. You either are or are not going to be able to revitalize a dilapidated downtown. You either are or are not are going to deal with the way that economic inequality has gentrified people out of entire neighborhoods and changed a neighborhood like my own central district here in Seattle that's adjacent to my neighborhood from a historically Black center lifeblood of a city to just another precinct of new white tech wealth. How you deal with these things can't be done with the tools of national politics. How you deal with these things is with a spirit of rehumanization, seeing that in a town, and that includes a town like Seattle, but that includes towns like Omak, Silverdale, Spokane, towns all across the state of Washington where people have politics very different from mine. I make it super clear, as you can hear in the excerpts I read, that I'm left of center, that my politics are progressive. But my view is, in politics as in life, you need both eyes. You need binocular vision to have depth perception. If I'm only seeing out of my left eye, I cannot actually fully appreciate what's going on around me. I need the vision provided by the right eye. I need to understand what small c conservatives would want in a stronger faith community, in a stronger sense of responsibility among neighbors and citizens, so they don't have to go to government as the solver of problems of first resort. I get that. I share part of that spirit. And that fusion and that synthesis, again, is really hard to deal with in national politics right now, and really necessary where we live in our towns. And so that spirit of synthesizing left and right, but also, as that excerpt from the sermon reminded us, activating the heart, thinking about what is the feeling that you like about being in a small town? What is the feeling that you might not like about being in a small town, wherever you are? What things would make you feel welcome and embraced and woven into social fabric? What things would make you feel excluded, like an other, like someone to be feared? And to think about the ways in which people all around us who don't look like us, vote like us, pray like us, move like us, sing like us, talk like us, eat like us, how they might be feeling. And I think right now, in this moment, early in the Biden presidency, there's already been a kind of preemptive backlash against language like unity or empathy. And look, I get it. There's been a lot of pain, and especially over the last 4 years, a lot of trauma. And that's just civically and politically. I'm not even talking about the pandemic. And so it's very hard to face that pain. It's very hard to summon empathy for someone whose worldview might have been actually a part of the cause of your own pain. But I think what President Biden is asking of us is not to be saints, is not to be completely self-abnegating people who say, my feelings mean nothing. Please let me be a vessel for all of your feelings and let me just try to understand you as an empath. No. I think what we are being called to do right now, and not just by the president, actually, though I work in the White House and spent a lot of time, formative years in DC, I'm not a believer that we have to all follow the lead of a president. I run Citizen University because, and co-founded it because I believe that, as the civil rights activist Ella Baker once said, strong people don't need strong leaders. I don't want a president to ride in as my savior. Now, if there's a bad president, I want to get that president out. But we've got to become a strong people. And I think that's the spirit of what's called upon right now in a book like Our Towns, which, by the way, is about to become an HBO film, is an HBO documentary film that will be airing, I think, in March. So keep an eye out for that. But also in all of our work at Citizen University, all of our programs. I've spoken about Civic Saturday and Civic Seminary. But we have programs for young people where they practice youth power projects. We've created a new program called Citizen Redefined, which extends this metaphor of civic religion, if you will, that you can think of as a civic confirmation program, where circles of teenagers will be guided by an elder over weeks and months in a process of moral, ethical, civic, spiritual formation, culminating in a public rite of passage that's akin to a church confirmation or a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, but is a civic confirmation. And so we've got this range of programs. And look, I have no illusions. We're a small nonprofit. We're based in Seattle, Washington. We're not Starbucks franchise in every town in the country, but we're trying to do our part. And the spirit of this book and the spirit of our work at Citizen University is to invite you all to think about what's your part. And my way of segueing into Q&A here is actually to circle back to Caroline Sayre, who posted in chat, who I named a little while ago as one of our alums of our Civic Seminary program, our Civic Saturday Fellows, because when I think about big citizens in our town here in Seattle, I don't know how many of you have heard of Caroline, but I want to tell you about her because she is, if you look up the phrase show up in the dictionary, it ought to have her face. She shows up by organizing Civic Saturdays. She shows up by being one of the first organizers of something called Ben Franklin Circles here in Seattle, which you should check out. Circles of people who come together and commit to a process of self-discovery together over many months using the 13 virtues that Franklin described in his autobiography, and that a young Ben Franklin kept in a notebook every day to ask, did I live up to these 13 virtues? Justice, temperance, perseverance, so forth. But Caroline also leads I don't know what they're called, she can tell us maybe in chat. She leads a little group of folks in Fremont on a regular basis, just picking up trash, just joyfully using pickers and grabbers and just going around and filling bags and bags of trash. And I think about that a lot, the ways in which we can show up, the ways in which we can take responsibility. And you might think, well, there's a ginormous distance between picking up trash in Fremont, Seattle, and making sure that the Senate of the United States provides for a higher stimulus payment during COVID relief. Yeah, sure, seen one way, there is a giant distance, but seen another way, that distance absolutely collapses, because all of it is about building citizen muscle. All of it is about building the capacity to mobilize people and ideas and money and social norms and influence with a spirit of character. That's called citizenship. And that's what we're trying to teach. That's what this book is about. And I just want to close by saying again, thank you. And let me now open up to questions that you all might have. And so I'm going to scan through chat here and see if there's some early questions just to get the ball rolling. Vincent Pierce, how are you, Vincent? Asks, what was your emotional, not intellectual reaction to January 6th? Were you surprised? Before I answer that question, let me invite you all to post any other questions you may have into the chat function. My emotional reaction was, I think, like that of a lot of other people in the United States. It was disgust. It was revulsion. It was an angry sense of desecration. I guess that's the, and I think one of the most notable words that was used in the minutes, in the live commentary on CNN during the insurrection, one of the most notable words in all that commentary was the word sacred. People talking about how this sacred temple of our democracy, this sacred space was being trashed. People were literally breaking it apart. People were flying the flag of the Confederacy in this space. And my initial reaction was that feeling of something sacred being violated. But what was being violated and what was sacred and what led to that sense of revulsion was not the building. I mean, yeah, sure, it was important to preserve the integrity of the building itself, but not the building, but the idea of the building, the idea of the Constitution, the idea that what people were storming the Capitol to do. And we must remember this right now, because there already is a rapid erasure going on among at least half of the people of the United States right now. That this was just another protest gotten a little bit out of hand, just like protests in Seattle this summer got a little bit out of hand. There's zero moral equivalency there. And I feel this, again, not just intellectually, but emotionally. What was happening on January 6th was that a mob was trying to prevent the Congress of the United States from fulfilling its constitutional duty. The mob was committing sedition. The mob was committing an insurrection. The mob was saying, forget the Constitution. We want it our way. And that is no way to run a democracy. That is no way to govern ourselves. Heck, those of you who are parents, that is no way to raise a child, to say that when you don't get what you want, you should just absolutely throw things over and storm the room or storm out of the room. We know this. And this is why the only people who think that the only thing you get in society and American life is rights without responsibilities, the only people who really think that are toddlers and sociopaths. The rest of us who try to live like citizens recognize that democracy is a game of infinite repeat play. You're going to win some and you're going to lose some. And when you lose some, you lose. You accept it and you move on. And so I'm getting emotional right now, but I think that was a lot of what was going on in my heart that day, and a lot of the anger that I was feeling. Was I surprised? Yes and no. I wasn't surprised of the fact of it. I mean, if you look back at the prior days, weeks, months of messages from the former president, and certainly messages among some of the most rabid and conspiratorial of his followers, what happened on the Capitol that day was actually nearly the completely predictable, logical conclusion of a chain of events and incitements. And so it wasn't surprising. And yet, on the other hand, I guess I was surprised still that Rubicon had been crossed in that way. And I think a lot of Americans were as well. And a lot of Americans were snapped back out of any sense of, hey, we can just paper over divides. We can just, treat this as a protest gone wrong. Something, again, profane happened that day. And I think a lot of people, not just Democrats, in our work at Citizen University, in my own circles of learning and action, I work a ton with a very wide range of people on the right, put it that way, ranging from never Trump reform-oriented conservatives to libertarians who hate both parties, to people who are just kind of strongly nationalist in their politics, to, you name it. But I think what all of them, when I said earlier, this sense of us and them that happens in civic life, there is an us and a them. There always will be an us and a them. Why? Because we're humans, and human nature wants to divide us into an us and a them. But what is powerful and important about nurturing a spirit of what we think of in our work as civic religion, an adherence to this creed and these ideals of equal justice under law, of liberty for all, of responsibility from all. What it means to live up to that creed is that there's a new way to define us and them, a civic way. The us is those of us who choose and repeatedly, in fact, do show up, vote, volunteer, learn, read from people we don't agree with, listen, empathize, circulate our power and our resource and our privilege instead of just hoarding it. And the them are those who don't. And I think the them should be judged. They should be judged for their failure to live like citizens. The most obvious example in a time of pandemic is those who refuse to wear masks. Now that refusal has become itself a badge of partisan and tribal identity, partisan identity. But to me, it's not about party. It's not about ideology. It's about a moral core of responsibility. And so there is an us and a them. But the thing about this us and them, unlike an us and them that's based on whiteness, on whether you were born on this soil, on whether you believe in this God, the thing about this us and this them is that it is possible at any moment for one of them to become one of us, simply by choosing to live like a citizen, by choosing to release the tantrums of rights, 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 me, now, 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 to release that way of thinking and moving in the world and to accept that they're part of a greater whole. And that transition that has to be prompted by an invitation. We who try to live like citizens must always be inviting people in, not canceling them out, not blocking them out. Judge when you have to judge, but invite and create a pathway back in. I think that's one of the most important tasks we have right now. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. I want to see if there are other questions for people to post into the chat. I don't believe we're set up in this webinar for people actually to vocalize their questions to be heard, but if I'm wrong, someone on the team in the background can just hop in and say so.
That's correct.
Okay, so
I do see other questions above.
let's see here. Thoughts on the fact that there's okay. Let me actually speak to this one. Lee asks, you use words like sermon and seminary. Can you explain more how the structures of religion are useful for a secular experiment like Civic Saturdays? I'm so glad you asked. the reason why we choose this language, the reason why we call these gatherings civic analogs to faith gathering and not just a meeting or an event, is twofold. Number one, we recognize on the most basic level, and I think January 6th actually has reminded tens of millions of Americans that democracy itself is fragile in a particular way. And the way that it's particular is that democracy requires faith. I don't mean faith in a God. Democracy requires faith in each other. Democracy works only when enough of us believe democracy works. And that mutual magical millionfold agreement that this thing should mean something, that the preamble should mean something, that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment should mean something, is just that. It's just a fragile, unspoken agreement. It's kind of like the same agreement that we all make that dollar bills should mean something, that a piece of green paper should actually be exchangeable for a piece of candy. When things are going smoothly, we don't question the unspoken agreement, the unspoken faith. In the context of currency, they talk about full faith and credit. In the civic sense, we think about civic faith. John Dewey called it civic faith. And so in the first place, it's reminding us that democracy is not just the machinery of how a bill becomes law. It's not just the process and the procedures of decision-making. It is, in the first place, prior to that, prior to the structures of government and self-government, and upstream of the structure is culture, is a set of norms, values, beliefs, habits, and shared narratives about how we're going to show up for each other and with each other. That kind of faith in each other and in our constitutional system of self-government requires nurturing. It is not self-executing. There may be truths about human equality that are self-evident, but they are not self-actuating. We have to actuate them, and that requires faith. That's the first reason. The second reason has to do more with our times. We're living in a time right now where people have lost faith in each other, in our institutions, in systems, and everybody, everywhere, left, right, center, feels the game is rigged. The fight is rigged. And we at Citizen University exist so that we can actually convert that feeling of powerlessness that comes when you think that everything's rigged against you into a sense of responsibility for re-rigging the game, re-rigging it. And that re-rigging is not just a matter of skills development. That re-rigging is a matter of a sense of collective meaning-making, collective purpose, and common purpose. We have to weave together again a greater, larger, unifying, inclusive story of us. What's so painful about this time, but also beautiful, is that a new America is being birthed right now. Whiteness and Americanness, which used to be synonymous and interchangeable, have delinked. And that's created a chasm of uncertainty and fear and anxiety and hopefulness, depending on who you are and where you are. And our job right now is with a spirit, a spirit of, hey, this isn't just an intellectual exercise. This is about us feeling like we want to be together and make meaning together and search out and scratch out a new story together. And that is the work of, the pioneering sociologist Emile Durkheim described religion of any kind, whether animistic religions in the Australian outback to, the Catholic Church. He described religion as the effort of any group of humans to sanctify the miraculous existence of groupness. The fact that we come together as a group and hold each other together in a community, in a group, the fact that humans figured out in the earliest bands of Cro-Magnon proto-humans is a miracle. It's a miracle. And democracy is the most advanced current form of that miracle. And that miracle requires us to believe that it's possible for us to change and upgrade and reform and weed and seed and feed the system as we need to. And that's why we emphasize so much this metaphor of civic religion. I know we're out of time, but I want to thank you all for these questions, for your presence, for your just engagement, and truly want to invite you into the work that we do at Citizen University. Check us out at citizenuniversity.us. Join us for an upcoming Civic Saturday. Apply for the Civic Saturday Fellowship if you're moved and you think, hey, I can do this. And you know what? If you think that, you're right. You can do this. No special background or training or knowledge of politics or history is required. You just got to feel like you want to live like a citizen and be open to gathering other humans to do that. And last of all, I do hope you'll go to your library and get on the holds list and check out Become America. And again, I want to thank the Washington State Library, the Seattle Public Library, and the Washington Center for the book, for this honor and for this evening. Really have enjoyed this, and hope, again, we can, before too long, regather in person and celebrate in the flesh. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Eric, thank you so much for your book, for your work, and for being with us this evening. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Good night.